Please be advised, all music tracks used in this production are sole property of Kelsunn Communications and are original compositions. Thank you.
Hey, it's Scary Jones, executive producer of Elvis Duran and the Morning Show on Z100. I want to talk to you all about my friend and fellow Brooklyn College alumnus, Silas, your e-journalist, social work advocate. Silas hosts and produces the award-winning Kelsunn-on-the-Air social work podcast. My friend and fellow BCR alum is now known nationally and internationally as Silas, your e-journalist, social work advocate. His podcast, it's also listed as one of the top social work podcasts you must follow. The award-winning Kelsunn-on-the-Air social work podcast.
Hello and welcome to all our listeners and viewers. This is Silas, your e-journalism social work advocate, producer and host of the award-winning Kelsunn-on-the-Air social work podcast, available wherever you get your podcast. Our podcast is rated internationally as one of the 40 best social work podcasts you must follow. This podcast promotes, celebrates, uplifts, and highlights the social work profession. Our aim is to educate the general public about the powerful impact social workers have on the lives of those they serve. The podcast will also amplify the vital contributions professional social workers make in every aspect of our society every day. Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Silas, your e-journalism social work advocate, host of the award-winning Kelsunn-on-the-Air social work podcast. And we're really excited today to have our guest with us. So please join me in welcoming my guest for today's show, Dr. Kari Tabag, who is an LCSW, and she has her R credential. She is currently serving as a member of the NASW, National Association of Social Workers, New York State Board of Directors, in her role as the Nassau County, New York Division Director. Dr. Tabag is an adjunct professor at Adelphi University's Graduate School of Social Work, where she earned her PhD and Masters of Social Work degrees. Dr. Tabag is certified as a supervisor in field instruction and a school social worker as well. She has 25 years of clinical social work experience. Dr. Tabag has served as a social worker in a variety of roles, including social work professor, school social worker, psychotherapist, consultant, clinical social work supervisor, social work field instructor, social work field liaison, college mental health counselor, director of wellness, and dean of student services. Dr. Tabag's community service extends to leadership positions and membership within several mental health organizations, including, as I mentioned earlier, the National Association of Social Workers and the Asian American Psychological Association, the AAPA. Dr. Tabag is featured in the National Association of Social Workers New York State This is Social Work campaign. She has also established the New York NASW New York State Asian American Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander, that's AANHPI Affinity Group. We're going to be talking about that a little more in detail as we celebrate Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Heritage Month, which is this month. And just to let you know, Dr. Tabag has been published in academic journals and book chapters, and she's been in the New York Times and also a publication called Phil-Am, which is a magazine for Filipino Americans in New York. Dr. Tabag is an active advocate and reflectivist, racialized, marginalized, and oppressed communities, public and secondary educational settings, while promoting cultural humility, research, academic, and clinical practice. Dr. Tabag's research examines experienced, gendered, racial microaggressions, and psychological distress among Filipino American women, reinforcing her positionality and agency as a second-generation Filipino American woman. This also further advances her professional and academic development. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce to some and to present to others my distinguished guest for this segment, Dr. Kari Tabag. Dr. Tabag, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so humbled by how you presented me. Thank you so much. It is my honor to be with you.
Absolutely. Really looking forward to having this conversation. So we're going to be talking about quite a few things centered around the celebration for this month of AANHPI Heritage Month. So before we get started, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about your background?
Oh, I'd love to. So hopefully some listeners can identify with this. I'm second generation, which means that my father was born in the Philippines, but he came here at a very young age, about 7 or 9 years old. And in the Philippines, you need to have someone here in the United States for a significant period of time, and then you can, sponsor the rest of the family. So I'm second generation. He's really not even half. He's one and a half. So then I was born, and I'm second generation. So I also have intersectionality in my background, but I identify my race and culture as Filipino American. And what's really interesting is I'm always learning about my background. So recently, for example, I learned that his father, actually his grandfather, my great great grandfather, was a farm worker in California when he came here. And he brought my father over actually. And so in my family, we have farm workers, Filipino farm workers, head chefs, and also my father was a printing press supervisor. So, blue collar jobs mainly. However, it really is interesting to me how it starts from that. And I'm also first generation to get a graduate degree and PhD. So I'm honoring my father's legacy because, I'm the one to carry on the name in the family. So through me, I will be able to carry on his legacy as Dr. Tabag. So it's an honor to do that.
Wow, and it's very interesting that you share that. And you did mention something that I'd like you to maybe expound on a little bit for our listeners who may not be familiar. You mentioned the term intersectionality.
Yep.
Can you enlighten our listeners a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. That's actually a question that I wanted to bring up, especially as we get further into our conversation about the Asian culture. Intersectionality refers to more than one race or an intersection of gender, could be sexuality, and it could be religion. And in fact, I didn't want to take up too much time, but it's a really interesting month because not only is it, on I refer to those acronyms as AANHPI, AANHPI month, but it's also Jewish Heritage Month. Yes. And my mother is Jewish. So for a long period of time, I was the only Jewish Filipina that I knew. And as I'm meeting more and more Filipino social workers with PhDs, I am actually meeting more of them. So it's really interesting. It's intersectionality is something that's actually quite a challenge. It's also very much a challenge for me. Has always has been. But now, as we're starting to see the evolvement of different generations throughout the Asian cultures, we are seeing more intersectionality, such as transgender. We are seeing many multiracial. I'm not the only one anymore. So that's, and gender itself, right, is a very big intersectionality, not only for Asian Americans but for other races and cultures itself.
Absolutely, absolutely. So as we're here, almost I guess about today's the 13th, so about in the middle of May, and one of the things that is being celebrated, among others, is the AANHPI Heritage Month. And also, we know that President Joe Biden, I believe on April 30th, he made a proclamation asking all citizens to recognize the month. So talk a little bit about the significance of recognizing Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander.
Yes. So it's my honor to do this actually, because a lot of people don't know. And so, we have historically, and I'll go over that with you a little bit further, but from laying railroad tracks, farming, like tilling fields and starting businesses, caring for our loved ones, a lot of home health care workers, and, honorably serving our nation in uniform. Communities are deeply rooted in the history of the United States. And AANHPIs who served on the front lines of COVID-19 and the COVID-19 pandemic as healthcare providers, first responders, teachers, and other essential workers. And we'll talk a little bit more about how the social workers are represented there. And it's also a way, the significance is to honor our ancestors. So I just want to give you a little bit of historical information. May 7th, 1843 is the date on which the first Japanese immigrants arrived in the United States, while on May 10th, 1869, was the first transcontinental railroad in the United States that was completed, with significant contributions from Chinese pioneers. And then in 1992, the Congress passed a law which permanently designated May of each year as Asian Pacific Heritage Month. And then you have Presidents Clinton, President Bush, President Obama, and Trump and Biden have issued annual proclamations designated May as Asian Pacific Heritage Month. And you said so yourself that Biden had basically reinforced that as well. So it's really significant. I see it as a way to honor our ancestors.
So speaking on ancestors, bringing us to the next point. So and you just did lay out the history and the origins of the month-long celebration. So let's kind of switch gears now and talk about this celebration, who we're recognizing, what this represents from a social work lens. So key social work points to consider when working with members of these communities. One of the things that's really important that we all learn as social workers is to know the population that you're going to be serving.
Yes.
So what are some key points that social workers need to be mindful of if they find themselves working with a population that falls into one of these categories, so that we can show cultural humility?
There is, and I thank you for saying cultural humility, because I feel that cultural competence means that, we are all perfect at knowing certain cultures, and we're not. I'm not even perfect. I'm still learning about my culture, like I mentioned. So cultural humility is a perfect term. So thank you for using that. There are a lot, but I just have a handful. The thing to remember is that Asian Americans are not a monolith, right? We are frequently perceived as a monolithic group, and with prejudices and myths masking our genuine identities. And I'm going to go further into that a little bit later. Many Asian immigrants who initially arrived under the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 and following the Vietnam War came from economically marginalized backgrounds. And I feel that Asian Americans are not seen as a marginalized or historically marginalized individuals, that we're not seen that way. So some of those subgroups include Vietnamese, Laotian, if I'm saying that wrong, I apologize, as refugees during this period. And so those were some examples. And the most important thing is that each ethnic group within the Asian American community has its own unique history, culture, and experiences. And those are, just some of the key points to consider when working with members of these communities. And I think a lot of people do put us into one gigantic group, but really we're not a monolithic group. That's the most important thing that I want to put out there.
Okay. Now, I'm still learning a lot about, all the different communities and cultures, but I know there's some specific holidays, and I don't know if I'm going to pronounce them. There's one, Diwali.
Yes, Diwali.
Yes.
Yes, that's South Asian Indian.
And then Holi or Holy, H-O-L-I.
I believe it's Holi.
Yes.
H-O-L-I.
Yes.
That's of the colors.
Okay.
That's also South Asian Indian. Yes.
Are there any key points that, for instance, social workers going into a community, working with the community, they develop a lot of close ties? Is there any way that social workers can show familiarity, by maybe giving a gift or understanding how a celebration takes place or unfolds, that could make them more endeared to the community?
I think that that you ask a great question, and it really opens up a big plethora of other questions, not a can of worms per se, but it's something where there's a big knowledge gap, I find, amongst social workers, because we need more social workers that are of Asian American descent, from the diaspora. And without that, we don't have a lot of gatekeepers, right, to provide that information. Otherwise, when we go by assumptions. And while we can ask our friends and colleagues about that, the thing is that a lot of us can make assumptions. So, and because we have different generations in each Asian American subgroup, some celebrate Diwali, for example, or Holi, and some may celebrate the Chinese Lunar New Year, and some don't. Also, for example, a lot of people, although my friends are starting to realize that I also celebrate the Chinese Lunar New Year, even though I'm Filipino, because it is part of my history, as you know, or may not know, that there has been colonization, multitude of colonizations among Filipino Americans in the Philippines, United States, for example, and Spain, as well as China. And there is some brief history about Japan as well, have colonized the United States. So we embrace that as part of our culture, and we also celebrate the Lunar New Year. So it's something where, because of that intersectionality, as a social worker, it's always so important to ask your clients. And what a lot of Asian cultures will do is sometimes they will invite, other people in if they feel comfortable. It depends on the different generations and whatnot. So I can speak for the Filipino culture. We definitely do invite people in, but it depends on the culture. Yeah, and it depends on how, the different family ties that are going on. I don't see them necessarily inviting a social worker because of the stigma that's with, social work itself, as well as, and we'll talk about that, the stigma of mental health services and support within the communities. You mentioned something earlier about that I definitely wanted to expand on.
Yeah, absolutely. So, maybe now would be really a good time to talk about that, because the stigma, it permeates it through all of the different racial and ethnic groups.
Yes.
How does that manifest itself in the communities that we're discussing today?
Yeah, in the Asian culture, and I found this in my research as well, is that, and we see this right throughout. And the thing to mention also about I wanted to mention that and make that clear about in working with the Asian culture, is that one of the things I found when I started to do research, I went in saying, oh, I want to do, I knew that my population, I wanted to choose, for example, Asian Americans, but I learned through my research that I needed to start with the funnel huge, and then really, really narrow it down to one Asian subgroup, because there are so many. I think there's like at least 50 plus. And according to the, all of the different, I have all these stats in front of me because there's just so many. We have Pew Research, right? And we have also where we had to do the census. Thank you. It's the census. Okay. But for example, there are 20.6 million people who identify as Asian, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander alone. Okay, that makes up 6.2 of the nation's population. Okay, that's according to the 2020 census. We're now in 2024. And like I said, the Asian diaspora is extremely diverse. So they're basically projecting that by 2040, that number is going to climb. And so it doubled between 2000 and 2019, and it's projected to surpass 46 million by 2060. We're in now 2024. It's growing. So, and we have, I just want to give some stats so I can expand on this. We have the 6 largest Asian populations are number 1, Chinese, number 2, South Asian Indian, number 3, Filipino, number 4, Korean, Vietnamese, and Japanese. Okay, so those are the 6 that are their largest and the fastest growing communities. A lot are located on the West Coast. There is a little bit in New York. We have Chicago, but that's to just give a statistical background. And the thing that we're finding is that a lot of the research that's out there is generalized to the monolithic Asian American community. Okay. But it really, and sometimes it'll break it down. But for example, if you have white, black, it'll sometimes just put Asian American, but it doesn't designate or disaggregate the gender, right? And it doesn't disaggregate what the Asian subpopulations are as well. So those are some really good points that I wanted to bring up. And I know that I'm kind of going a little bit on a tangent with the question, but we also have the utilization of mental health resources is very low, even though, for example, Filipinos, because that's my area of central focus, they have insurance. But if you look at Asian Americans in general, the dropout rates are high. So they may go into receiving services, but the dropout rates are pretty high. And they like to contain, like you said in the very beginning, within the family. We are seeing intergenerational conflicts, like in any family. There's certain terms that are used in the Philippine culture. You know, it's about keeping things within the family. Otherwise, it's shame. It's seen as shame, which Hiya, Hiya. In the Chinese culture and other Asian cultures that, you know, follow Confucianism, filial piety, it's important to show love and respect. And this is what I think you were referring to, showing love and respect for one's parents, ancestors, the elders, which we're starting to see from a mental health perspective. And it's also Mental Health Awareness Month. It inhibits one's individual independence. You know, it suppresses their creativity and eliminates their personal desires and their interests. I mean, this is filial piety. It's often associated with Chinese culture, but it does apply to a lot of other groups. I just wanted to make that clear. So there's that collectivism that we're seeing. You know, it really, you have to basically look at the individual needs and consider primarily put your individual needs aside, is what that's saying. Put your individual needs aside. Family comes first, community comes first. So if you're doing this, you're shaming the family, it's embarrassing. We want to keep it all within the family. I hope none of my family members listen to this, but they may. I will say that I have been asked, and I'm more than happy to support my family, but we have to be careful, especially if you're an Asian American mental health specialist, not only social worker, that we have to keep those biases aside, and we have to sometimes set boundaries, but we are the first line to help our family members. We're starting to see a big increase in suicidal behavior amongst this population as well. Not only since COVID-19, but that didn't help. That didn't help as well. So there's really a lot of need for, Asian specific social workers to reach out and help our community, but there's not enough.
Okay, and thank you for enlightening us. So now you mentioned earlier that there's times when they do interact with getting mental health services, but you mentioned then there's a large dropout. So
yeah,
what do the statistics say the dropout is caused, and what has your research and findings? You know, they start and then they drop out, and you can kind of make a correlation between the AANHPI population and other populations because in the African American community and the Latino communities, a lot of it is like keep it in the house. You don't talk about what happens, and just get over it. But in your experience, from your cultural perspective, what are the reasons for dropout?
Some of the reasons, but I don't want to generalize it and apply to everyone, but I'm just going by the research and what I know. So it's important to look at each Asian subgroup, right? Because, for example, there's a lot of Western-based, forms of therapy that are used. And so, for example, you're not going to do and use too much psychodynamic therapy with an Asian family. And that's the other thing, too, is a lot of therapists are not including the family. You need to include the family. It doesn't matter what the age of the person is. You want to include the family. Now, once you engage your client and you join with them and you form an alliance with them, then you can move towards that. But it's something that really is important to include the family. It's part of their world. It's very important. And also, if you look at, so for example, of course, I'm going to go with, my research and my background, this Filipino psychology, right? That's more Western based. But we have the scholar Enriquez, who called it Psikologiyang Filipino, and that's Filipino psychology. Okay. And so a lot of psychologists, Western based psychologists, don't know that. And they may not use that. Also, there are newer forms of therapy, so you're not going to do psychodynamic therapy. You could maybe do cognitive behavioral, but you really want to work more towards having knowledge and filling that knowledge gap of something that may be short-term solution focused, brief therapy, using more strength-based, therapy, and really learning about that culture. And especially, maybe finding a gatekeeper to the community. There are linguistic issues also, where maybe English isn't their first language, and there's generational gaps. So that's the other thing too. And of course, right at the top is where you have a lot, and it's also, connected with the suicidal behavior, where you have a lot of Asians who experience racial acts of discrimination, right? And so we are starting to see how that, and that was my study, especially among Filipino American women, how that affected them on a psychological distress level. And what we found, or I should say what I found, is that that there are, everybody thinks post-traumatic based syndrome. No, it's actually racially based trauma. So we're starting to see a lot of racial based trauma that needs to be addressed, and it needs to come to the surface, and for them to be provided to have a brave space to talk about that. It needs to be assessed. There's some scales that are there, that they can be used in working with the Asian culture. So I would definitely, bring that up. It's called the Race-Based Traumatic Stress Symptom Scale. Carter and Barkett from 2015, they found that. And that's actually something that I would recommend that a lot of social workers and other mental health professionals acquaint themselves with. That's a really great scale to use, as well as looking at post-traumatic growth. That's something that I've written a chapter on about Filipino Americans, how there is that, they've gone through these, if you look at the culture overall, collectively, they have gone through colonization. They've gone through trauma even before these racial acts of hatred. The timeline that I found in my research through the StopAAPHIHate.org website is pages long. And it starts in 1790. If you print it out, I think I counted about 14 pages of a timeline starting from 1790, and it's still going on. And this one stops in 2021. We're now in 2024. It's amazing. It started in 1790 in the Naturalization Act. And my video just popped out for a second. Sorry about that. And then we have, historic times in which Asian Americans were discriminated against, and nobody really knows about that. Nobody knows. And even I, reading through this, I of course know a lot about it because that was part of my research that I needed to know about it. But a lot of people don't know a lot. And so if you are, a social worker working with this population, there are resources, and I'm throwing them out there periodically. StopAAPHIHate.org. If you don't know of that one, please check it out. And there's also, there's a great article, and this is actually one of my Kapwa, Dr. Bersamira, Clifford Bersamira. He's Filipino, and he wrote it with his colleagues Lau, Lee, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, Yamauchi. And it's entitled Anti-Asian Hate's Impact on Asian American Social Workers, Implications for Professional Training and Education. There are resources out there that are for social workers based on so many social workers that are Asian doing all of this groundbreaking research, yet they're not really acknowledged. So just giving shouts out to my colleagues that have done this groundbreaking research and that I have had the pleasure to know and work with, but we need to shout it out there that this is out there for the social workers. And the CSW-E, Council on Social Work Education, has not, and that's one of the frustrating things that we're fighting for. Some public schools are including it in their curriculum, Asian American heritage. But when we look at social work, for example, they're not even acknowledging other cultures as well. I think women should be acknowledged. I think the Black community should be acknowledged. And so we generalize things, for example, as oppression and diversity, or, as those kind of courses. But really, maybe we can offer electives about working with different, subgroups, different cultures. So I'll get off my soapbox now.
Okay. No, so it is a worthy soapbox to be on for sure. One of the things that I wanted you to maybe just kind of enlighten our listeners and viewers to, is there more acceptance now within the AANHPI communities for the profession of social work, or is it still a little standoffish?
That's a wonderful question. And I thank you for mentioning that. That's one of the things, right, where we talk about that filial piety. And, I was thinking about that, and I'm so glad that you brought that up. I still think, and again, I love my family so much. Let me just put that out there. I still think that I think if you look at social work, for example, social work is seen as a profession where it's, okay, we take children out of the home, right? We do a lot of casework. It's not seen as clinical as it is, right? And there's nothing wrong with casework, by the way. That's grassroots. That's where we started from. However, in the Asian community, for example, in the Filipino culture, stereotypically you are to be a nurse or a physical therapist or an occupational therapist, or, really one of those higher paying professions like a lawyer or whatnot. And my late aunt, who was Filipino, I found out she wanted to be a social worker, but my great-great-grandfather, her father, had said to her, no, you are going to be an accountant. And that's not what she wanted to do, but that was the expectation. This is what you're going to do. So for women, for example, in a lot of Asian cultures, South Asian Indian, for example, as well, you are to get that degree. You're to be a doctor. You're to be a lawyer. Even maybe go into the STEM field now, right? And then on the day of your graduation, okay, now you can get married, and now you're going to have kids. So a lot of Asian American women are now, not only from a different generation, not only are they, working through being pulled in one direction to still honor their heritage, but at the same time assimilate into the American culture and do everything, and also take care of the family, like you were saying, right? Through, making sure that, we're taking care of our elders as well as our parents. And then if you're married, then taking care of their family as well. It's a really big, tall order. It's a lot. So, and then you wonder why there's a lot of suicide and suicidal behavior. It's just a lot to live up to.
Okay, now as we get ready to wrap this up, and it's been very enlightening, thank you for educating all our listeners and viewers. If there was a thought that you would like to leave viewers and listeners to illuminate, the importance of learning more about the AANHPI population and culture, per se, what would you say?
I would say definitely join the organizations, the Asian American Psychological Association, like I was mentioning, stop AAPHI.org. I know California has a really strong NASW, chapter, because there's a large percentage of them there. And through my work here with New York State, NASW, we did start that. We did start bringing to the forefront, and that was a positive, a silver lining of the COVID-19 pandemic, right? But as a social worker, I feel the model minority myth plays too much at the forefront of a lot of people's minds, not only social worker, just the population in general. that's something that I wanted to get a chance to mention as well, is that you have the model minority myth, which started in 1966 through a Life magazine article, I believe it was, that, they cited the Japanese as achieving success compared to the general population. So we're supposed to be great at math. By the way, I'm not. We're supposed to be, and I get asked all the time, I'm either a nurse or a psychologist, right? And that's one of the things that we deal with on a daily basis. It's microaggressions, right? Those covert forms of racism and sometimes discrimination based on that model minority myth that we're all successful. But there are marginalized Asian populations, Asian subgroups, where they have economic hardship. Okay. So these are the things that I would really ask social workers to acquaint themselves with. If you don't know, join these organizations, read about it, go to these conferences and go to the webinars. And if you really realize that you need to work with these populations and you want to work with these populations, please ask, fill the knowledge gap. There's so much research out there that so many are doing that it's there for you to acquaint yourself with.
Very, very nicely said, very well put. And so on that note, I want to thank you, Dr. Tabag. It's been a great conversation to have with you. I've been looking forward to this quite some time now. I'm glad you were able to come on this month and highlight and illuminate some of the really positive things and some of the challenges and some of the inroads that still need to be made. But as you said, we all need to continue to educate ourselves about the populations within the AANHPI. And like you said, it's not a monolith. I think that's really very important to know. And I think that you've done a lot to bring forth more resources that are available. And we as social workers, in a general sense, need to kind of take hold of that, utilize it, and also reach out to professionals like yourself who are knowledgeable. Yeah. So thank you so much for coming on. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, it's the Kelsunn-on-the-Air Social Work Podcast. Been having a really great conversation with my friend and colleague, Dr. Kari Tabag. Dr. Tabag, thank you so much for being a guest here on the show today.
Thank you so much. It was my honor. Thank you.
Once again, this is Silas, your e-journalism social work advocate, producer, and host of the show. You've been listening to the award-winning Kelsunn-on-the-Air Social Work Podcast. This and all other episodes are available on our Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and iHeart audio podcast platforms, among others. The podcast is also available on our Spotify and YouTube video podcast platforms. Go to any search engine and type in Kelsunn-on-the-Air in the search window to hear this show in its entirety. Please make sure to click subscribe to support our podcast. And don't forget to like, comment, download, and share. To reach us for more information, email us at info@kelsunn.org. That's info@kelsunn.org. Or to suggest future topics, log into www.kelsunn.org. That's www.kelsunn.org and fill out the Share a Topic form on our homepage. Thank you for tuning in. This has been a Kelsunn Communications production.